100 Days of Making Comics Round 3, Week 6. Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where we create robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. Those other threats this week, continuing from, this is the 6th week now where we're doing the 100 Days of Making Comics Round 3, and I am working on I'm not working on a Werewolves and Unicorns story. I'm working on a story for a Werewolves and Unicorns themed anthology. If you don't know what that's about, then, man, should I get into it? It seems like I get into that every single time. And if it's, I mean, was it Jim Shooter who used to say that from Marvel Comics that everyone's comic is their first comic? So in some ways I feel like I have to explain this in case it's your first video and you're not familiar with what that is. But for all the other people, you've heard this before. But real briefly, the 100 Days of Making Comics is where it's a challenge where you spend 30 minutes a day, every day, on your own personal comic book project, and you do that for 100 days straight, and then you share that on social media every day, and just to hold you accountable and let people know you're doing it. And if you've completed that challenge, then you could be eligible to be in the anthology. This is the second anthology. We did a life in space themed one. This one is a Werewolves and Unicorns themed one, or other mythical creatures. I'm in sort of that other mythical creatures territory with my story that I'm working on. So this is the 6th week. I'm not sure where that puts us in the challenge. Is that a third of the way? Or that's math. I'm not thinking about that right now. But it's been a crazy week for me. It's just some good things, some bad things. I'm not gonna get into the bad things, but as far as good things, which do sort of create some issues too, is I got a lot of client work kind of dropped in my lap lately, which is cool because you need that to kind of keep afloat and everything, but it's kind of taken me away from the comic book project. Now, because of that, I've only been able to do those 30 minutes a day, which is fine. But previous to that, I was putting a lot more. I mean, there were some days where I worked the whole day just on my comic, which is awesome. But because of that, I was able to get ahead of schedule, so I'm not too worried. So I didn't get as much done this week as previously, but I'm in a good space, which is good. But I've just got a lot going on right now. One of the things that I'm planning on doing, and I don't know if I mentioned this here on YouTube or not, but next month, that being March, next month, March, I'm going to launch a Kickstarter for my comic book, Young and the Dead. There's 3 issues available right now, but I'm going to be including the 4 and packaging them all up. You can get one, you can get any one you want, or you can get them all, whatever. But I'm going to do that Kickstarter starting next month. So as a promotion for that, I started doing these sketches, these little 80s zombie themed sketches, and posting them on Instagram. And I was doing really good. I was putting one up a day, and then I got slammed and I kind of fell off, but I'm going to get back into that. And I'm going to use these as rewards for the Kickstarter for certain tiers that will allow you to also get a sketch along with your reward. But yeah, that and the planning for the Kickstarter, all that, kind of took a back seat with some of this client stuff. But I'm finally kind of rounding a corner now where I think everything's kind of falling into place, and I think I'm going to be in a place where I'm able to more manage my time a little bit. So yeah, there's that. But we're here to talk more about the comic, not Young and the Dead, which is also my comic, but the short story I'm doing for the anthology. It's 4 pages. Again, mine is I'm using the theme other mythical creatures, and I'm using a sort of a Loch Ness monster theme. But my story is kind of unique in that it's 2 stories in one that are kind of 2 parallel stories going on at the same time. Now, I'm happy to say that I finished up one of those stories, so my pages kind of look partially finished, but that story is finished as far as the penciling. Now I've got to do the other story that's running parallel, and that's the one that has to do with the Loch Ness monster. So I haven't done a lot. I mean, I showed earlier, I did show you some concept designs I was working for creatures and things like this for the Loch Ness monster. Probably not going to see as much of that. It's going to be in shadow, but that's the section of the comic I haven't got to yet. So I'm looking forward to starting that next week. But I'm happy to say I did finish that other story. Now, the other part of the story is going to be a lot, or was a lot more difficult, because when you're drawing, it's easy. It seems like it's, at least for me, and I think a lot of other people, it's easier to do stories that kind of take place, maybe like if it's like a fantasy epic that takes place like sort of Lord of the Rings, where it's out, you know, in amongst fields and mountains and things, because that natural stuff is a little easier to draw as far as perspective and things like that. And also when you're drawing mythical creatures, or any creatures, they're a little easier because they're a little more forgiving, because you don't have to get the anatomy totally right. Same thing with like these zombies. You look, I just noticed how long his arm looks. But you know, you don't notice it as much on something like that. And I can always, this one I can always say, well, his arm's kind of, you know, out of his socket and it's just held it on my skin and that's why it's so long, or whatever. You can make up little excuses for stuff like that. But those are just quick sketches anyway. But the creatures can be a little more forgiving. So as I'm moving into this other part of the story, it takes place out in the open, under the sea, so I don't have to worry so much about perspective. My last episode was all about working with perspective and getting all these little details. So the hard part of the penciling is pretty much done. Now to this other half of the story, and I think it's going to hopefully go a lot quicker. So I'm looking forward to doing that last week. But looking forward to doing that next week. But that is next week. Today, let's talk about this week. And why don't I do that? One of the things I want to talk about is sort of experimenting with style and things, especially with these smaller projects. It really gives you a good opportunity and time to do that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So let's get to the drawing, and we'll talk about that stuff. So here's a fun panel. I've never been that great at drawing cars. So what do you do when you have to draw something that you're not good at? Just draw like about 100 of them in one panel. so that's what I'm kind of doing here. So I have this scene in the story where I need to show traffic, and I played around with a bunch of different views and things like that. But I'm kind of liking this one. And hopefully it illustrates that this is definitely a traffic jam, that there's a lot of cars on the road, so I drew a lot of cars. Cars, not my strong suit, but you know, with anything, once you kind of learn that everything is made up of shapes, cars really aren't too difficult to draw. It's the same with people. When you start breaking them up into cylinders and spheres and things, or with cars, it's all boxes and geometrical shapes, and once you start breaking those down, they become a little easier. But anyway, so that's what I'm doing with this particular panel. But now, I don't want to say that I wouldn't have done this on Young and the Dead, but one thing that I'm trying to do with this shorter 4-page story is stretch my limitations a little bit and try some things that maybe I wouldn't do, some techniques, some panels that I wouldn't do with my normal story, because the other story, Young and the Dead, is this ongoing series, and even though I don't get it out as quickly as I should, if I was to take probably the amount of time that went into what I'm doing with this 4-page story on that, it would probably take me even longer. So I'm trying to, you know, stretch my muscles a little bit, experiment with some different style, and try some things that I wouldn't in my normal comic, that I've already established a workflow with. And with that workflow comes some, I don't want to say shortcuts, but just a certain way of creating those pages that kind of expedites that process. With this one, I'm like, you know, I'm going to step back. I'm going to try a panel with a bunch of cars. I'm gonna try, you know, some different rendering techniques, which I haven't really got to yet, but when I get into the inking stage, that's some things that I might want to try. A little more blacks, maybe some splatter effects, different things, because this story is a different kind of story too. Although some splatter effects might look really cool in Younger the Dead because it's a zombie story. But you know, that's something that I'm trying to do, and I think that's something that you guys should take into consideration if you're working on, or you know, if you have a long-term project.
And sometimes you need to take a little break from those long-term projects just to kind of rejuvenate and spice things back up and everything. And so if you're in the middle of a larger project and you decide to do a smaller project, kind of stretch your muscles creatively and try some things that you normally wouldn't. Whether that's taking a little more time that normally you couldn't afford on a larger project, or kind of what I'm doing here is that and I've talked about this before, but I'm learning Manga Studio, or Clip Studio Paint as it's now called, and I'm really starting to like this to the point where, you know, I'm even starting to use digital in some of my client projects, the sketching phases and everything, whereas before I would immediately just go to, you know, my loose leaf paper, my copy paper, and start sketching things out. I'm starting to do that digitally. So you know, this is really giving me a good opportunity to try some of that stuff that I normally wouldn't, because, and it's, the other thing is, the way this project works is we're not really getting paid for it. Now, if the Kickstarter is successful for this anthology project, how we do sort of get paid is that however much money that comes in, it's split between us all in the forms of the amount of copies of the books we get. So say last time I think we got everyone got like 10 copies of the book. It might be less this time because there's more creators, but I'm hoping with more creators, because more people, they have their own fan bases to bring to the table. I'm hoping that this will bring in, exceed what the last Kickstarter did for the last anthology. But anyway, so everyone got 10 books, and you can turn around and sell those, and since we're not having to pay for the printing, because that's what the Kickstarter covers, those books, which I think have a retail price of like 20 bucks, you can turn around and sell those for 20 bucks. So if you can turn those around, then you can make a little bit of money. But because this is sort of doing it, I'm kind of working for free here. I'm taking this as a learning opportunity. So it's kind of like, you know, sometimes when you're learning things on your own, you're not getting paid to learn. So in this is a good instance, or good position to take this project and turn it into a learning experience. And that's one of the ways. So no matter what, even if I didn't get any books or whatever, and I don't want to say that I wouldn't do this for free anyway, because this whole group, the 100 the 100s, the whole crew that surrounds that, I would do that anyway because I love this community and I want to give back to it. So, but it's kind of cool that in addition to whatever, I get these the copies of the books and I can turn around and sell those and everything, that approaching this as a learning experience gives me, you know, even if there wasn't any money involved or whatever, I'm gonna feel good at the end of this, because it's basically like I just sat down. Like if I was to just sit down and say I'm gonna learn Clip Studio, and so I just put so much time aside and just start sketching or drawing, just anything in there. It's always better when you have something to show for it at the end. So that's what's kind of cool, is that while I'm learning the software, and it's already benefited me. Like I said, I'm already using some of these digital techniques for my client projects, and because of that, those client projects are going a little faster, so I'm picking up my pace and everything. And you know, people who have been using digital for a while, and let me state again, and I always bring this up because I use digital for a lot of stuff, but it hasn't always, I mean, most of my client work, especially graphic design, anything like that, and if you looked at some of my finished prints and everything, a lot of those are mostly done digitally. But I've always kind of sketched traditionally, and with comics I've always done my comic book stuff pretty much traditionally, except for the coloring or the shading and the lettering. So with this I'm doing a lot more digital, and it's good to take those projects and use those as sort of a time to learn this stuff. So that's what I'm doing. So that's one of the things that I'm doing, and yeah, it's really, I'm really surprised at how much I've I thought it would take longer before I started getting into it, to the point where I was like, I'd be like, yeah, well, I'm gonna start using this for my client projects as well. And I've already, I think 2 or 3 different client projects in the span that I've been working on this have benefited from what I've learned from just taking the time to sketch in Clip Studio and come up with my concepts and everything. And that's really cool.
Okay, so there we are. That's where we are in the challenge. This week a little more difficult. Next week, hopefully, I'll have more time. But I think, again, the hard part is over. And yeah, I'm just having fun experimenting with you know, changing up my style a little bit, adding a little more detail, all that cool stuff that I talked about. But what are some of the things that, if you're working on this anthology or any small project, or maybe it's your first project or whatever, what are some different things that you're trying? Now, I guess that doesn't make sense if this is your first project. Maybe they're not different things. But if you're working, it doesn't matter. Whatever you, or maybe it's a certain way you're used to drawing and you're doing a project and you're trying some different things. Whatever the case is, what are some things that you're doing right now that you're trying to kind of go outside of your comfort zone, or kind of reach outside of that box, or however you want to phrase that? Let me know in the comments section, and I will see you guys later. That is all.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.